resolving into these voices. So I had more or less Soul's point of view, I had Hearst's point of view, I had Wynkoop's point of view, and each of the poems seemed to require its own form. So if you go through, you'll notice that the form is different in each of the poems. Some of them are straight up free verse, like Hearst's is. She's reading Walt Whitman, so I thought, well, it made sense if her poem was in the form that Walt Whitman wrote in. So that I did that, and then Wynkoop was an actor. In fact, he was, in addition to being a major in the Army, was an actor, and he was a drunk. That's why when he says in his letter how it's somehow appropriate, or something, I can't remember how I put it, that he is playing the drunkard, which was a very popular play at the time. And he was known as a big drinker. But he was addicted to Shakespeare. He loved Shakespeare. So I made his in blank verse, which Shakespeare wrote largely. Stuff like that. Finding the form was very difficult for me. I wanted them each to sound distinctive. Yeah?
In terms of form, the last segment of Marksman, Calvert, it deviates in terms of the fact that we have both the past and the very moment expressed.
Yes.
What led you to that kind of intrusion of the present, kind of?
Boy, that's a really good question. I wish I had a really good answer. Originally, I mean, in the first complete draft of the poem, it ended back in Hearst's voice with her at the graveside. So that it was in the same style as the first section, section 2, where we first meet her. So it was in that style, and it was more her thoughts. And then as I wrote about it, the more I wrote, the more it broke out into this larger form, and all of a sudden I was experiencing it as a choral, almost like a choral performance. You know, if you guys have, I don't know if you've had the opportunity to read any ancient Greek plays, but in Oedipus, in Agamemnon, in any Trojan Women, any of those plays, the Greeks had what's the word, a technique of representing the community, and it was called the chorus. And in the texts, you just have long choral statements, and it's clear that the tone changes, but they didn't necessarily call them out by, okay, this is the first speaker, this is the second speaker, but later editors have done it. So when you read them, you get the community reacting to the tragedy that they're watching happen in front of them. And as that developed, that became kind of the model I had in mind, the idea that this would be a choral type of presentation. And so I wanted it to sort of breathe and then contract, and breathe and then contract. So that's how it ended up. Hopefully, I mean, other than personal satisfaction, the idea of writing a historical poem like this was not something that had ever occurred to me before. But I'm hoping that the ending does one thing at least, which is to make clear that Silas Soule, as a figure, not as an individual person, but for what he did, is contemporary. We all face, at one point or another, moral decisions that are very, very difficult and that threaten us. They threaten our lives, they threaten our livelihoods, and do you make them or not? And so I wanted to draw people in to help them think about what that means. And also the nature of the law. What is the law about? Silas Soule, and of course he draws on Emerson in this. Emerson, Ralph Waldo Emerson, great essayist, read him if you get a chance. Emerson viewed moral issues as being issues of character. What type of character do you have? If you make bad moral decisions, it damages your character. And one of the problems of history then is absorbing what was done. I live in a place called Indian Hills. Pretty ironic. I teach and work at University of Denver, which was founded by John Evans, who was the sponsor of Chivington and really one of the prime movers behind the Sand Creek Massacre. So it's the ironies there. The point is to be conscious of it, to be aware of it, and then act out of that knowledge instead of, oh no, I don't want it to be a swept corner of American consciousness, because then that allows you to just go ahead and make the same mistake over and over and over. As we do, we may have noticed. If you look at recent history, we make the same mistakes. Because I had somebody come up to me after a reading once, reading from the one that was published just before this one, called Thread of the Real. And the middle section of that is political poems, really. The first kind of little flight of them deal with the Iraq War. And somebody came up afterward, why do you want to drag Bush out? That's all ancient history. Ancient history? Really? We're still there. We're still, now there's people want us to, they want us to put boots on the ground in Syria. I'm going like, and it's ancient history? No, it isn't. It isn't. History is something that you need to learn from, and that means you need to kind of carry it in your head. Americans are very bad about their history. I don't know why. I don't know why we are so cavalier about it. It's like we don't really think it matters. But the people who are the survivors of the things we did, talk to any Plains Indian descendant and ask them how they feel about the American government, and you'll get a point of view that you won't get on Fox News or CNN or anything else. Yeah.
Have you had any comments from the Indian community with regards to this book?
I did. I made a presentation. This was actually before the book was published. And this was out at Red Rocks Community College, and there was there were like 3 English classes or something that came together, and they had all been working on dealing one way or another with Sand Creek. So I did a presentation. I had a PowerPoint and everything, and a Arapaho woman came up to me afterwards, and she asked me a very good question, which I was surprised nobody else had ever asked me, but I was kind of prepared for it because I'd worried about it myself. She said, why is the Indian point of view not represented in the poem? And I told her, just honestly, I felt, first of all, there are already excellent poems out there. Simon Ortiz, who's Navajo, I believe, writer, did one called From Sand Creek, a book-length poem from the native point of view about Sand Creek. Why would I, a white guy, step in and attempt to do what he's already done? So instead, I would have people read his point of view. If they want to read my book, I wanted to read, tell the other side of the story. And there's even a third side of the story. We always say there's 2 sides. No, there's multiple sides to every story. There's a historian at Arapaho Community College, ironically enough, who has a whole book about what he calls Indian depredations, which means the attacks that were going on local ranchers, farmers, people going through, and so on, gold miners and that sort of thing. And in that book, he even questions whether Sand Creek happened the way everyone knows historically that it happened, because he is siding with the pioneers, right? So that's another point of view, and it's worth reading. And it covers the the wars that were going on, the informal wars going on around Denver and this whole area between 1863 and 1866, right in the sweet spot of where my book is. So I read his book, and it was full of this granular information that we were talking about, you know. But his point of view is something that I don't get how a historian could come to the conclusions he does, but that's okay. I'm not a historian. Other questions about it, or? Yeah.
How many people died at the Second Creek Massacre?
In the neighborhood of, well, the numbers vary between basically 2 and 200 and 225, something like that. It is considered the largest single massacre of Native Americans in one action in the West. So, although there was a slaughter of very similar proportions up in Montana that happened in 1870. In a way, it was even worse because the Indians that they killed were fleeing to Canada. They were getting out of Montana, but they wanted to rub them out, so they did. And around 200 there too. Yeah, and all they wanted to do was get out. But once you have the mood that a country sometimes gets into, where they feel like they own everything and they want to eliminate whatever's in the way, that kind of thing happens. We killed how many million? Was it 4 million buffalo? I think because they wrecked the railroad rails. They would thunder through and dig up the rails. Couldn't have that, so 4 million buffalo later, which had the additional, from their point of view, at the time, positive side effect of starving the Indians. So, oh boy, that's good. I sound very cynical. I'm terrible, I'm sorry. Other question?
How about a little reading from your book?
Okay, sure.
We've got to about 34.
Oh. Read my mind. I did want to say one other thing before I read a little bit. There are 2 other longer poems, longish, not nearly as long as this one, in the book, and I present them as preludes, and they're preludes in the historical sense. The first one takes place historically, one generation after Columbus's discovery of America. Of course, the first thing that Columbus did was to enslave the people he found. They were Taínos and Arawaks, which were, actually the Taíno was a subgroup of the Arawaks. And he enslaved them and took representatives of these people that he had found back to Spain. And what fascinated me about that was that everything I read about it, all kinds of sources talked about these people being presented to the court of Ferdinand and Isabella in Spain, but nobody said what happened to them after that. So I concocted a story to explain what happened, and it was based on the very well-established pattern of Europeans coming in and, how should we say, having relations with native peoples. And so the poem is the descendant of one of these, he's a mixed blood guy who's a descendant of one of the original Taínos who was brought back. And he's an artist, and he is painting the death of Columbus. Columbus died very poor on his death, by the way. But anyway, so he's painted that, which makes him. Columbus was by that point was considered a hero of Spain, and the Inquisition became interested in this guy, and he has a bad end. And then the second poem is about, I read a wonderful book on the American Revolution in Indian country, and it was about how the American Revolution split many of the tribes, some of whom were enemies of each other, and so they took sides based on that, and then others who had been previously united got split between who's going to be better for us if the revolution, for example, are the British going to be better if they win the revolution? Will they be better for us? Then they would side with the British. So very complex, interesting situation. But in the process of that, I read an actual transcript of an interview they did with a Revolutionary War soldier who had been involved in the destruction of an Iroquois village called Oquaga. And so, I mean, it was amazing, a first-person narration. So I just did a kind of a poetic version of that. The real irony being, they went in and, of course, burned the village down and slaughtered all the people. The interesting thing was that the people had, about 15 years before that, been all converted to Christianity. So the ironies don't end when you look at history. Anyway, those are the two of the preludes that go up to this one. Because I see it all as part of one big arc, historical. Let's see, what would you like, is there any particular thing that you would like to hear out loud? I know what, let me do Chivington. I don't often do Chivington. Now you really have to use your imagination and imagine me 6'8", right? Yeah. This is April 22nd, so this is the day before Silas is murdered. The logic of the poem is that they had sent this, essentially a spy posing as a journalist, to find out if Sol was going to be a further threat after his testimony. And Sol, with of course not knowing who he's talking to in that interview, says that, I think I'm going to write about this myself. And that's what seals his fate in the context of my poem. So this is Chivington getting this report from the journalist. The man's shaggy, brooding head, nimbused in a blue-gray smoke, slants like outcropped stone over the desk's litter. A stubbed cigar angles out of the cramped mouth, each breath shaking loose, a snowfall of ash, each grunt, each exasperated sigh. A narrow window behind unfolds a view of evening, the sun gashed open on distant crags, clouds like stained bandages bannering over the dusk-flooded valley. His thick-set fingers flip the pages, tug now at his beard's black scraggle, now at an earlobe plump as a prickly pear. Bastard, he thinks, and crushes the rambling report in his fist. Buyers could do no better than this sly wretch? Lily-livered, bleeding-heart son of a bitch? Well, no matter. I am certainly confirmed in what's been set in motion. Righteous is as righteous does. Who am I to whistle back the hounds? By tomorrow, this corrupt commission will have lost its most beguiling voice, this coward, this insubordinate soul. Yet hearing Sand Creek described in a courthouse atmosphere does give pause. It sounds, strange to say, wicked. Although God knows it cannot be. Elsewise the Bible would say, thou shalt not kill vermin. It doesn't. It endows man with dominion over nature. Cattle and cowbirds, deer, bears, cutthroat trout, field mice, serpents, all. Therefore, these savages too. Odd how these creatures' fates can so move Christian folk, that they set aside their rational fears to whine about a few killed Indians. Soul is why. Wynkoop, yes, but he was absent from the battlefield, and soul, they tell me, is better liked. Soul is why. Soul is all that stands between my blood-soaked past and a fresh future back in Washington. He fishes a match out of his pocket, strikes it, refires his cigar, lights the oil lamp's wick. The westward range of mountains has blacked out. Night and cold winds are bearing down on Denver City, on stables, barracks, churches, theaters, poor miners' shacks, and would-be mansions. The war is over, he thinks. The Union saved. Soon its mighty feet will plunge into both oceans. What sane man would refuse to accept the gift God in his wisdom has laid before us? That's Chivington. Ooh, wait. Yeah, Chivington is, that was his view of things, really. And the view of many, many people. Some of the early histories of the United States, if you read them from the early, like the 1920s in that period, this idea of manifest destiny, God gave us all this, and we better use it.
Why did you do a breakdown of that one?
It's a visual deal. Well, for one, two things. One is there are, we have in English a tradition of Anglo-Saxon poetry, and the Anglo-Saxons split their lines like this. And if you go back like Beowulf, we have Beowulf up there. If you look at the original Beowulf, it's broken into two lines like that. So and it's a poem about warriors. So warriors, I associate with that. So that was in my own head. Nobody else would see it. The other is just the visual. You know what negative space is? Yeah. That's what Chivington was all about. He was a Methodist preacher. Anything else? 2 minutes. 2 minutes. What are we going to do? Yeah. No?
Why is the title of this book?
This one? Oh, the title of the book, because the other two poems, the Preludes, are men, are both about men, basically focused on men. So the three together are marked men, but this poem is a marked man. So it's about Silas. So he's one of the three marked men in the book.
Thank you so much. We appreciate
Thank you. Thank you.